Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, December 22nd, 2022. A lot of twos involved in today's date. That's exciting news. That's all I know. I don't know what else happened yesterday. I was very busy. I had a meeting last night, and I don't know anything about anything. President Zelensky of Ukraine came and spoke to the assembled houses of Congress yesterday. By most accounts, an excellent speech. I guess I kind of wish I'd seen it, but very interesting happenings. I happened to see, one, a lot of praise for the speech, two, in passing, in one of the social media modes or another, I happened to see people mentioning that, I guess apparently, I don't know, I guess they figured it would be some kind of cool stunt, but was it Lauren Boebert and Matt Gaetz showed up for the speech? Of course, they are among the weird wing of the Republican caucus that is against helping Ukraine fight its war against Russia. Anyway, they showed up not to heckle the speech per se, but to make a statement and a stunt anyway. While there were lots of sections where there were lots of applause going on, these two apparently were among several who pointedly refused to applaud. That is their right. It's a First Amendment freedom to withhold your speech as well. But apparently they made a big show of avoiding the metal detectors on the way in to this joint session at which a perhaps controversial international leadership figure in the middle of a war with Russia was coming in, and they have reasons to believe, as Elon Musk does, that people might be interested in his assassination coordinates. And Lauren Boebert, of course, makes a big show of at least claiming she's carrying guns all the time. She avoided the metal detectors and evaded the police, who made some effort to get them to go back through it, at least for this special occasion, refusing to do so. And I guess relying on their constitutional right not to be arrested on their way to or from meetings of the Congress, which is actually in there, and said, there's nothing you can do about it. I'm going in there. You can't check me for weapons. I'm going in there to be angry about the international leader who's about to speak to a joint session of Congress. So just a little fun terrorism for the evening. Good way to start this morning. And, well, the news is they did not shoot Zelensky. So I guess that's good, and we have to take what we can get now because apparently the Constitution is a suicide pact. So that's good news. We needed to find that out early this morning. It's also good to know, I'm going to give you all the very important stuff. One, the Constitution is actually a suicide pact. And two, Teslas have a fart mode. Okay. Just wanted to let you know that. Tom Tomorrow tweeting this morning, today I learned Teslas have a fart noise mode. I was not aware of this either. There is a tweet from one Caitlin, who goes with the Twitter handle of medicine_noose. I don't know what that means, but Caitlin says, in response to a tweet from one Eliza Blue, who I think is one of the people who oversees the Twitter operations for Elon, tweeting last night, Elon Musk could cure cancer right now and people would still find a reason to be mad. Well, he might be able to do that if he could distract himself from the other fantastic innovations he's brought to market, like fart mode. Caitlin responds to Eliza by saying, I keep thinking about the time I rode in an Uber that was a Tesla stuck in the fart noise mode. The driver just kept shaking his head and sighing and muttering under his breath, I just don't know how to stop it, as the car made a loud fart noise every minute or so for the entire ride. That's got to be uncomfortable. There are better things, better noises you could be playing inside the cabin. I've had the idea recently that you ought to be playing the Jetsons flying car noise inside and outside the car as well. That's a package I would actually pick up and buy. And then we thought, a couple of us sort of riffing on the subject online, thought that, for instance, you could have a package that would detect where you were geographically and play the Sopranos theme if you were driving up the New Jersey Turnpike in the appropriate place, coming out of the Lincoln Tunnel or what have you. Anywhere near alley, exit 145 on the Garden State Parkway should probably trigger that one. There's a number of things you could be doing except playing the fart noise. I guess that'd be funny once. Maybe that shouldn't be a mode that you can get stuck in. But he could cure cancer, or there could be fart noises played in the car. That's an important advance, and he's obviously a genius, and it's a good thing he's got billions of dollars. All right, well, there's real news besides all of that, but Zelensky's in it, and Greg Dworkin is here with his, I rebranded for this week, Sleigh-O Stories. The Raft-O Stories is iced in for the winter, and today it's a sleigh, so ho, ho, ho. Welcome, Greg. How you doing?
Hi. So
Hi.
for sure it was the car.
Well, the guy said it was. There is a mode. I don't know. I mean, you could, for all I know, really honestly, if you had some sort of gastrointestinal problem and were farting about every minute and just said, I just don't know how to stop it, that would explain it too.
I mean,
you would say the same
thing. You have to understand the
car.
mindset
I wouldn't believe that.
of tech bros.
Yeah,
right?
I guess so.
First of all, to have that in the car. And secondly,
I do it.
It's easy to picture
a
guy who's an Elon Musk fan.
Yes.
Right, just having on his iPhone fart noises playing on the front seat where you can't see it.
Sure, right.
And him turning around saying, "There's nothing I could do about it."
Right. I guess I can see that.
This is a
happening.
really boring job, and I got to do something to spice up the day. So I'm going to play fart noises and pretend
sounds like
I
something
can't do
spiced
anything
it
about
up. You should have less spice in your day, apparently.
And you're going to pay me for it.
We're all paying for it in the end.
Look, everybody's got to work for a living, so it's a living, and that's what I do.
Yeah. All right. Well, right. You never know what could be a lie, like perhaps your entire resume if you're a member of Congress, cars that fart. I don't know. Yeah, it's a good point. You never take the
or
guy's
that I
word
believe
for
in
it.
democracy, all sorts of stuff.
Right. Okay.
So we're going to get to the big news of the world.
The
world news is that Zelensky came to Washington and gave a terrific speech. And, there are issues, plenty of issues that he brought up in terms of what Ukrainians are going through right now, winning the war, but getting clobbered in terms of being a civilian and having power and light and such, and Christmas and all.
Car is stuck in front.
Before we get to that, some lightning round stuff. First of all, I didn't have time. I only noticed it like 5 minutes before the show. So I didn't have time to listen to it. But absolutely, and I recommend this to you, I'm listening to this podcast over the weekend.
Podcast. Yes.
It's from the Colin McEnroe show. You may remember Colin McEnroe. He wrote that fantastic article about how he's sick of Sandy Hook being put into a 10-year anniversary box.
Okay, yes.
He's a local. He's really good. And this particular show on public radio, Connecticut Public Radio, is called Rules
CPR.
Rule. How rules, both written and unwritten, shape our world. They're everywhere. This hour, he says, we talk about the history of rules, the power of unwritten rules, and we'll look at why some rules succeed and others fail. That's the part I'm really interested in.
Yeah, all right.
Plus, we'll learn about baseball's unwritten rules and talk to a game designer about how rules facilitate play. So the people he has on the show are Lorraine Daston, author of Rules, A Short History of What We Live By, Jason Turbo, who's a journalist and author of the Baseball Codes, Beanballs, Sign Stealing, and Bench Clearing Brawls, The Unwritten Rules of America's Pastime, and Eric Zimmerman, who designs board and video games.
All right.
Actually, he's an arts professor of game design at the NYU Game Center. And he's written a book called The Rules We Break, Lessons in Play, Thinking, and Design. And I wonder if that Uber guy playing the fart noises had read these rule-breaking paradigms before, he decided, look, I got to do something to make my day,
right?
And this is what I'm going to do. Meanwhile, for today, I wanted to just mention, since this is kind of a follow-up for yesterday, I finally found the piece I'm looking for. What is Title 42, the COVID border policy used to expel migrants? And it's from CBS News, and thank God. I mean, everybody's been talking. I saw it again on the news last night. Title 42, a Trump-era rule that affects immigration, is set, what is it?
Well, yeah.
A Trump-era rule. What is it? So here it is. What is Title 42 and how did it start? On March 20, 2020, at the outset of the COVID-19 pandemic, it was a public health emergency, and Donald Trump previewed a measure to curb, quote, mass uncontrolled cross-border movement, end quote, a move that would ultimately go further in restricting migration than any of his administration's previous hardline border policies. So basically, it was a rule only Stephen Miller could love. That day, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Robert Redfield, remember that guy?
Yes.
Invoked a World War II-era public health law authorizing U.S. border officials to expel migrants found in Title 42 of the U.S. Code, which grants the government the power to prohibit in whole or in part the introduction of persons and property to stop a contagious disease from spreading in the U.S.
Wow.
So basically, you have to have a public health emergency in order to do Title 42. Now, whether the whole idea that the public health people can do this is one set of circumstances where this rule, remember rules? This rule could be overturned by courts by saying it's illegal, it's stupid, you can't do this. This is way beyond the scope of what public health can do. These are the same people who think you can't mandate vaccines or masks, but somehow you can mandate that you can keep people out of the country because now we're talking about non-Americans. You can do whatever you want with them.
Yeah, well, sure.
All right.
Of course.
And then there's another set of rules built into this where the courts are saying, look, it's not a public health emergency anymore. So you can't invoke this rule forever because you like the results. You're not the Supreme Court who decides law based on the results.
That's us. We're crazy.
You're just like regular people, so you can't do
How
that.
do you know that, though? Maybe I am the Supreme Court. I might put it on my resume and say I am.
So despite its stated public health justification, the CDC order authorizing the deportations was signed over the objection of top experts at the agency who didn't believe the unprecedented policy was justified, according to congressional testimony and CBS News reporting. Officials refer to a deportation under Title 42 as an expulsion, since it's not carried out under immigration law.
I guess. Okay.
Right?
I mean,
on paper, a Title 42 expulsion is supposed to occur soon after migrants are taken into custody, since the objective is to minimize the chances of them spreading the coronavirus inside the U.S.
Yes, all right. That would be
and that's why you can pick them up and then immediately eject them to Mexico.
Ptoing.
And that's why the right wing loves it. And when you hear about it on national news, generally all they say is Title 42, a Trump-era rule that decreases the amount of people crossing the border. It doesn't. It's what happens after they get here.
Yeah. In fact, it increases the number of people crossing the border. Well, it doesn't increase the number of people. It increases the number of crossings, right? I mean, if it works, you catch somebody coming across the border and you turn them around and send them back. That's 2 crossings.
Well, then they come back, and then you send them back, and then they come back. And
it's
then
not the same.
There's a whole lot of it doesn't work built into this.
Okay.
However, accepted everybody knows theory, because if you ask Republicans, this is what they tell the media, is that if you get rid of this rule, the number of people crossing the border will skyrocket. And let's go interview some people who say, yes, I'm just waiting for Title 42 to go away, and then I'm crossing the border. I'm freezing here in Mexico. It's terrible. The conditions are awful, but I'm waiting until this rule gets a sufficient second, and then somehow or other gets closure, and then
That's what's probably motivating. I'm not going over there until fart mode is fixed.
So it's some of the dumbest coverage, but that's all you hear, and so it sinks into your head, and then you have to remember, wait a minute, this thing's about Title. Gee, it sounds right that Title 42 shouldn't get. Why shouldn't they get rid of it? It's everybody down on the border who's a Republican is telling us it's bad. What is it? I forgot, but I just remember it's bad.
Yeah.
It's bad to get rid of it. It's good to have. Well,
okay.
What is it? Well, we execute people as soon as they cross.
42 of them.
You can't do that. Well, they're not telling us what they do. They're just telling us that it's a good rule to keep people on the other side.
Mm-hmm. Well, right. Yeah, it is kind of bizarre that, they love explaining things. I mean, you pick up the newspaper every day and I find unnecessary explanations all over the place. I mean, and they're not unnecessary, but
Like that whole show about rules.
Yes,
like
well,
my
for
entire
that.
1 hour segment, 3 days a week, you know?
Right. Well, that's definitely unnecessary. I should stop doing that. But yeah, you pick up the paper all the time, and I always make fun of it when we read things like, Ms. Harris, currently Vice President of the United States, says da 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 da. I'm aware of that. You don't have to link to her. We know she's the Vice President. You don't have to link to Joe Biden, who was elected in November of 2020. Yeah, I got it. This one they can't tell us.
Right.
Okay. Well, CBS
So,
did. So that's good.
again, a reminder, it is perfectly legal and consistent with U.S. principles and practice and rules of law for people to apply for asylum in the United States. And this Title 42 thing doesn't allow that, because as soon as you see them, you scoop them, you dump them.
I can't have you.
You don't even ask
asylum.
whether or not, you don't process whether or not they have an asylum claim.
Yeah, you can't do that while they're, well, if there were a real public health emergency and they were in danger of spreading disease, you can't sit there and have the hearing with them. You got to have them, I don't know, at least quarantined somewhere. But all right, well, that's very interesting, and it's maybe no longer applicable, but you can see why people want a shortcut.
Yeah,
to expelling
well, there's been
people.
2 million expulsions.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
So you should be, I don't know, I guess if that makes you happy, you should be happy.
So the first thing the Biden administration did is they declined to revive the Trump practice of using Title 42 to expel unaccompanied children.
Aha, okay.
The Trump administration expelled 16,000 unaccompanied minors before a federal judge in November 2020 halted the practice, finding it unlawful.
Okay. And they wanted to keep doing it.
All right. And the ones
I understand.
who don't get expelled get sent to immigration detention facilities, and then Ron DeSantis sends a plane to pick them up, and they get sent to Martha's Vineyard.
Right. Very humane.
Right.
Because
so,
health
the whole issue of border policies obviously needs to be addressed, and more money needs to be sent to those who are trying to house and take care of folks that they weren't expecting and don't have facilities for.
Including
but it's almost impossible to do that in this
environment
because Republicans.
Yeah. And these Republican stunts, by the way, I was saying, not only does more money need to be sent, and that doesn't just mean to the Martha's Vineyard or wherever they're accepting the redirected refugees, but yes, to the southern border states who say this whole stunt is about drawing attention to the fact that they don't have the resources to handle these people. We could give you the resources. I mean, we haven't been, but we could give them to you. But I have a feeling that these Republican governors would then refuse them and then say, see, we're underfunded, or we won't take them because they have federal strings attached, or no, we don't really want to help people at all. We just want the border closed. So the whole thing's been a stunt from the beginning, although it's interesting that they don't send people, to Mexico, but rather to Martha's Vineyard to help with immigration. Okay, deeper into the country. It's an odd way of approaching it, but you should just admit you don't want them here.
Right.
Anyway.
So let's turn to the major news.
You'd think they would admit that. Okay, major news.
Speaking of what they would admit and what they wouldn't admit, that's a very lovely segue to talk about how the Republicans reacted to Vladimir Zelensky.
Okay. Hello, I am Vladimir Zelensky. I don't know his voice.
Yeah. Well,
I should have watched.
How shall we approach this? It's so odd. Perhaps the first thing to mention is the very people who are really upset at Joe Biden and think it's really clever to shout, "Let's go, Brandon." Are very upset with Zelensky because he disrespected the president by dressing in military fatigues.
Yes, well,
or his version of it, which is an olive shirt, T-shirt.
I guess so. Okay.
And it's just pretty amazing. But I feel that this is progress. Because if they're willing to accept that Biden is president and it's bad to disrespect him, I think, it's moving the ball down the field. Yeah,
that's true. Very interesting for all the people who are big on don't disrespect our president.
Yeah.
Where have you been?
Where have you been? So the first piece I want to do here is by E.J. Dionne, which is the budget. No, that's not the one. The one is Zelensky's powerful address.
Oh, yes.
Brought home why responsible Republicans are so alarmed about the damage of GOP House in the hands of an erratic majority easily pressured by its right wing. could do to the fight for democracy in Ukraine at home.
All right.
And
followed.
It's basically a pretty nice piece talking about the budget deal. And he reflects Senate Republican fears of the new GOP House.
All right.
Basically,
I have that.
The entire GOP House is such a potential landmine that even Senate Republicans are going out of their way to try to defuse it. It's pretty amazing.
Okay.
And Zelensky, of course, brought this home. And the way that was done, John Harwood summarizes a Kathy Young piece in the Bulwark. I don't particularly like Kathy Young she's a never-Trumper, but, a little too conservative for my taste. But, she's got a good finger on the pulse of conservative thought. And John Harwood very kindly summarizes it in a series of tweets, which means I don't have to, dwell too much on Kathy Young. So Harwood says, look, why the Trumpian populist right is consumed with hatred for Ukraine. A hatred clearly beyond concerns about the U.S. spending a very small portion of our military budget or about the non-existent involvement of American troops. And it doesn't have a simple answer. Partly, it's simple partisanship. If the libs are for it, we're against it, and the more offensively, the better.
All right.
And if the pre-Trump Republican establishment, the H.W. Bushes,
oh boy,
is also for it, then we're even more against it.
How can you even find out? So few of them to ask.
Yeah. Well, they all served in the W administration. They're still around.
Partly,
it's the belief that Ukrainian democracy is a Biden, Obama, Hillary Clinton deep state project, all the more suspect because it's related to Trump's first impeachment.
Wrong state, but okay.
So there's that strain. Partly, it's the national conservative distaste, or what Kathy Young calls the NatCons. I just call them NatCs.
Right.
Partly, it's the national conservative distaste for liberalism. Not only its U.S. progressive iteration, but in Kathy Young's eyes, more fundamentally, their distaste includes Reagan-Thatcher conservatives who are for individual freedom and personal autonomy, equality, limited government, and international order rooted in these values.
Yeah, they suck.
That's
for sure.
That's, in her eyes, the pinnacle of the city on the hill, shining at that. And, I see the shining. She sees the shining city on the hill. I see the shining. So basically, she thinks that the conservatives reject even Reagan-Thatcher visions of an international order because the NatCons, the Nazis, they see it all as a Jewish globalist conspiracy. And she writes, many NatCons are far more sympathetic to Russia's crusade against secular liberalism than to Ukraine's desire for integration into liberal secular Europe. And all of that's true. I mean, there are strains of that, and that's why, people like Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert sat on their hands while an interesting bipartisan group of people who attended, that's the key word, who attended the speech,
yes,
Republicans and Democrats, cheered and gave Zelensky a hero's reception.
Okay.
Now, how do you reconcile what Kathy Young and John Harwood was summarizing with what you saw last night with your own lying eyes? And the answer is easy. It's in that key phrase, attended. To attend. David Kurtz says over at TPM, how the GOP receives Zelensky. Don Jr., Zelensky's basically an ungrateful international welfare queen. And I forget, I think it was Tom Massey, had tweeted, of course I'm not attending this thing. I'm paraphrasing. I don't remember the exact words, or as the J6 committee witnesses might have said. Tom Massey said words to the effect of, I'm not going to listen to a speech from a Ukrainian lobbyist.
Right.
Okay. In addition to complaining about the fact that he wasn't wearing a suit and disrespecting Brandon.
Right. Boo.
But
did he give the speech in that getup?
Yes.
Okay. Just
Yeah,
wondering.
the same outfit
He might not have had more clothes.
that he used to give the press conference.
Okay.
He
So
also
that was his
gave the
gear
speech.
for the day. Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
And the point there
That's interesting.
is that 86 of the 213 GOP House members showed up.
Oh.
So most of them didn't.
Okay.
The ones who did cheered.
All right.
Most
Nice
of them
of
didn't
them.
show up. So if you're wondering why it was such a bipartisan thing and why it felt so kumbaya, because most of them didn't show.
Yeah.
Like Massey.
Oh, so yeah, some of them are anti-Ukraine. Some of them might be afraid of upcoming weather. I don't know. But
They didn't want to honor
Yeah.
Speaker Pelosi for her last
maybe.
joint session that she presides over. This is one of those situations where the background is Vice President Harris and Speaker Pelosi standing behind Zelensky, elevating them in their rise, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. And by the way, one of the interesting factoids that has nothing to do with anything and probably is not even relevant, I just found it fascinating, is that I saw some side shots of Harris and Pelosi instead of the frontal shots you normally get on C-SPAN.
Okay.
And I hadn't realized how far away from the podium their chairs actually are.
Oh, yeah.
The chairs are against the wall, but it's like 9 feet until you actually can reach the podium.
Yeah.
That way they don't have to push their chairs back to stand up and cheer. But, the perspective that you get on TV is that they're sitting at the
Right
podium.
on.
They're not.
Like they could read over his shoulder. And
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. That's true. It's a good. That's interesting. It's worth pointing out. All right. Now we'll have to go and take a look.
You knew that.
See
I
those
didn't know
pictures.
that.
Well, it was useless information anyway. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Or read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got to go check out whether Amazon is sold out of olive drab Ukrainian mock turtleneck long sleeve shirts. See, oh, it's crew neck. I'm sorry. It looked like maybe in my view of the picture. It's described here as crew neck. It looked like it might have been a mock turtle, but no. Okay. No wonder the outrage.
Yeah.
Okay. No
At least it
collar
wasn't a
whatsoever.
V-neck,
Yeah, well, we can't have any of that. He should have come in a disco shirt with the unbuttoned and a big medallion.
So David Rothkopf, who's bailiwick, whose strike zone is foreign policy, writes in the Daily Beast, Mr. Zelensky goes to Washington as a winner.
Yeah.
300 days into a war he never sought, the Ukrainian president's D.C. visit reaffirms U.S. resolve, rebukes the fringe Republicans who want to cut aid to the besieged country. And by the way, that's an assumption on my part that the major reason they didn't show up is because they plan on cutting aid off.
They might try and do that, yeah. That's a
And it's just an embarrassing situation for them. For those of you who thought Republicans couldn't be embarrassed, they can because they don't want to show up to stuff like this.
Yeah, maybe.
The ones who can't be embarrassed, like Lauren Boebert and
yes,
Matt Gaetz,
show up no
go
matter
through metal detector.
Yeah, we wanted to find out if you
should
have
be a medical
medicals.
detector. They go around them and then show up and aren't embarrassed and sit on their hands. But most of them didn't. They actually stood up and gave the requisite standing ovation at the appropriate times, just like their Democratic colleagues.
So that was nice of some
just
of
like
them.
their Democrat colleagues.
Yes, right. They have a bad track record with the Ukrainians. These Republicans do. Did Kevin McCarthy attend? I'm curious.
No,
because...
there were several
He says he's the
photoshops,
leader.
photo ops, and I noted this yesterday, of Zelensky meeting
Hmm.
with Leader McConnell
Yes.
and with Schumer and Pelosi, the
Right.
three of them plus Zelensky, whereas McCarthy had a, quote, private meeting.
No
He was
photos.
too chicken to show up and get his picture taken with Zelensky, in other words, because he's running for speaker and he didn't want to offend Marjorie Taylor Greene, presumably.
Yes, although I thought she was in the tank, but maybe not. Anyway.
Well, he doesn't trust anybody's in the tank.
I wouldn't. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
As a matter of fact, there's a whole piece circulating. I don't have it in front of me, but I had put it aside somewhere about how
to the side
Rona
of me.
Romney McDaniel is in trouble.
Oh, for
She had all the votes. They were all locked up. She's going to be the next RNC chair, just like she's been the previous RNC chair, because she did
yes,
such a great
she'll
job.
Continue on doing
And
nothing.
losing isn't her fault. And it turns out she actually doesn't have them all locked up.
All right. Well, that wouldn't surprise me. And I wondered whether that would change. They spent yesterday saying, yeah, some of her testimony to the January 6th committee was particularly damning for Trump.
Yes.
And I would say that would make
And
things
that's
tough.
fueling a right-wing challenge to
Yeah,
her. So
that's
it's
what
not
I
like
figured had
it's
to happen.
getting better and they've seen the light. They're actually going perhaps to vote for this right-wing nutty lawyer, one of the few who hasn't been discredited completely,
Well,
and still will defend Trumpers, who in fact was Ronna Romney McDaniel's own lawyer when she testified in front of the January 6th committee, but is now running against her.
I didn't realize that. So
I mean,
he
you
sat
can't-
next to
it
her
doesn't
while
get
she
better
did
than
this, and didn't do anything. And now well, you know what? She's a traitor. Right? Vote for me. I thought maybe Mike Lindell would make hay out of this, but
Well, nobody wants
can't make
Lindell
hay out of
because
anything.
they know he's like insane.
I know. But awesome. I want him. How come we can't meddle in
But
this?
it's
election?
interesting that you brought up the fact that, yes, she testified January 6th, and it didn't look particularly well. In fact, it was extremely damaging
Yeah, I would have thought
to
this
Trump's
would-
situation.
I'm surprised she even tried to run.
Because basically, I think we talked about this yesterday on the show, she testified that the White House switchboard was used to contact John Eastman, who himself is in legal peril. Anyway,
Yes,
so
that's right.
things are not going that well for her either. But in any case, it was pretty clear Zelensky had a great night. Again, it's being covered all over the world. And Rothkopf points out it's entirely fitting that Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky wore his battle fatigues to the White House. That's because the battle he's successfully leading against the Russian invaders who have attacked his country is being fought as much in Washington as it is along the front lines of the war. He faced far
metaphorically.
greater personal risk when on Tuesday he wore his now signature khaki uniform to meet with the troops in Bakhmut in Ukraine's Donetsk province. Or remember, it's the Donbass, but not the Ukraine.
right.
Pelosi got that wrong, but I don't think anybody's going to yell at her. But coming to Washington required a different kind of courage. I mean, when you grew up saying the Ukraine and then realize you have to
Yes.
repronounce it,
It's
it's Kiev, not Kiev, that kind of thing.
yeah, that one's more difficult. But yeah, that's I don't know. Somehow
I grew up pronouncing it Peking.
oh well.
Getting
Oh my God.
Beijing under
Bombay.
my skull, it's taken a long time,
Yes.
and I still don't always do it.
Yep, it happens. But yeah, I guess that's indicative of it being a region of a country as opposed to a country in itself. Although we can always, I don't know why that
yes,
is
and
the
that's
case. We're the
exactly
United
right.
States
There's a
of
whole
America,
linguistic
right?
thing about why the Ukraine versus Ukraine is such a big deal, which I could send your way if you're interested.
Yeah, I guess I would like. What I would like is for them to tell me why saying the United States of America is okay.
Because
know.
everything we do is right.
Yeah. Well, I guess if we it's the United, it modifies United as opposed to if we said the America, I guess it would be bad.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't know. Maybe that's it linguistically. I'll take a look at the piece. Probably off the air. I don't think even our audience would sit through that.
So here's a piece
Maybe. All right,
from
there's the
the
Friday show.
conversation. You remember the conversation? They're the ones that always tell you whether or not the authors have any monetary ties to the topic that they're talking about.
Okay. Do they?
In this particular case, no.
Good.
And that's it's Ukraine, not the Ukraine. Here's why. For most of the 20th century, English speakers referred to the Ukraine following Soviet practice. That's not the case now. Ukraine's official name in English does not include the, and for good reason. Ambassadors, commentators, and historians have tried to explain the change, but not everybody's gotten the message. So let me try. I'm a linguistic anthropologist and an expert on language politics in Russia. I'm also bilingual in Russian and English, so I understand the subtleties of the distinction.
Okay.
So just those are qualifications. And no, I don't have any financial disclosures here. What is at stake? Nothing less than the political sovereignty of Ukraine. Yet in their coverage of the current crisis, some journalists and commentators still refer to events unfolding in the Ukraine. It might seem innocent. It's not. Both the Russian and English languages make subtle distinctions between territories that are politically delimited and territories that are not. In Russian, people refer to events happening na Ukraine or v Ukraine. Russian language teachers usually explain the difference between na and v as the respective difference between on and in. One places ketchup on the table and puts away in the refrigerator.
Okay, I see.
Things get a little more complicated when describing larger spaces in Russia. A person is na, an unbounded territory such as a hill, but v, a bounded territory that's defined politically such as a nation state. And this distinction between unbounded and bounded territories holds even when English speakers would universally use in. So a person is na the Caucasus, but v Germany.
Yes, okay.
English makes the distinction not with different prepositions, but with the article the. English speakers use in before the name of a politically defined unit, such as a nation or state in Germany, for example.
Right.
And in the territory that's not politically defined, in the South.
Oh, okay.
Right? Last week I was in Kentucky, but last week I was also in the Bluegrass region.
I see.
That's even less defined. What do you mean, Bluegrass? What's the black belt?
Ah, okay.
You know, that sort of thing.
Oh, well, that's interesting. That's an implication I hadn't even considered. Well, that's not really a sovereign territory. It's just sort of a nebulous idea that people down there or have, and we think of them that way, but they're not a real entity.
Yeah.
And that's what they're trying to do with Ukraine.
Right.
Not the Ukraine. That's them helping. All right. That makes some sense. It's a little complex.
And that region where the coal miners live and tend to vote, Republican more often than not. What's that called?
Well, we don't say the Appalachians, I guess.
Right. So
we just say Appalachia.
We say you live in Appalachia.
We should say that.
I mean, so there's rules and there's exceptions. And they go on to say there are exceptions, but since these are the general principles that bind speakers of Russian and English, that's why we use it. Last week I was in Ohio, is fine, but if I turn to a friend and say last week I was in the Ohio, you must go to the Ohio State.
Yes, that could be it. The Ohio State University, which is a smaller, unbounded region. It's got boundaries, but
if you said the Ohio,
you're either in it or you're out.
She might reasonably think that I was in the waters of the Ohio River.
Oh, yes, that's right. That's true. I guess
I was in the Mississippi as opposed to being in Mississippi.
That's right. Yes, that's exactly what I would think.
Right. That's why this stuff is interesting.
Is it okay? Yeah.
All right, maybe obscure, and it may have nothing to do with politics, but it's interesting. So the distinction is critically important for the sovereignty of the Ukrainian nation state. To a Ukrainian worried about the nation state's territorial integrity, the little word "the" might suggest the speaker doesn't much care whether Ukraine is an independent state. As opposed to, well, I've been using "the" for like 60 of my 70 adult years, and
it wasn't
a hard habit to break, and that's not what I mean, but I am sorry, I apologize.
Yes.
Like it or not, and intentionally or not, the language a person uses reflects their political positions, including their position on Ukraine's territorial sovereignty.
Well, I disagree, but okay.
Oh, yeah? Well, how do you feel about pronouns?
Right.
The language a
that's
person
exactly
uses
it, though.
reflects their political positions.
Yeah. I mean, but, if Ukrainians ask you to say, can't you just drop the, I will try.
So this is where it gets sort of funny, subtle, and like it doesn't mean anything. But too bad for you, Vladimir. Not Vladimir, Vladimir.
I see.
So does Putin say in the Ukraine or in Ukraine when he speaks. In a subtle twist of diplomacy, the English language translations of Putin's recent addresses have him describing the events in Ukraine, even though that's not what he says.
Yeah, I'm saying thee. Listen to me. Thee.
Yeah, I'm saying V. I'm saying V. I'm saying no. I'm saying nah. I'm saying nah. Even Putin's translators see the benefit of sticking with the official English language name. Perhaps they hope it will make the content more palatable to a Western Anglophone audience. But make no mistake, Putin is arguing that Ukraine's sovereignty is historical fiction. He's underscoring his point by referring to events happening in the Ukraine. English speakers don't have to follow him by saying the.
All right.
So just so you know.
We can't understand what he's saying.
I thought that was really interesting.
That is. All right. I mean, unexpected, but there you have it. Well, we have to get used to it's important to understand the roots of the usage, like Title 42. I don't know. Everybody says it's not the Ukraine anymore. Why? All right. Well, hold on. I'll get you the Title 42 explainer for this.
Right. So back to David Rothkopf. American support will remain crucial to Ukraine's ability to defeat Russia and reclaim the land Vladimir Putin is seeking to illegally seize in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. That's Vladimir Putin. Zelensky's task was to ensure the support remained unwavering. His D.C. meetings began with a meeting of the man who's been his most important partner, President Biden. The two leaders have been linked in ways that would have been impossible to predict just a year ago. Both were grievously underestimated by Putin. Both have risen to the demands of standing up to Russia's vaunted military in ways that have produced dramatic successes for Ukraine and humiliation for the Russia, all the Russias. Both were perhaps also underestimated in their own countries when the war began. Certainly neither was seen as a wartime leader, but today the two are the Roosevelt and Churchill of the Ukraine war. There you go.
All right.
Who could have predicted? Well, we all knew Biden was better on foreign policy than Trump. And we all knew that Biden was better on foreign policy, at least in terms of experience, than a lot of the people he ran against in the primaries. That we didn't know that like his policy would be better, but we did get the impression he had a little bit more gravitas when it came to saying, well, I've met with these people and they know who I am.
That's right. I would have to agree with that. That reminds me why I was asking about whether Kevin McCarthy showed up at the speech. I just recalling that.
I don't know that he did.
I mean, you said that he had a private meeting.
He didn't even show up for the photo op.
Is the claim.
I didn't see him. I mean, they often would flash around the chamber and show people.
Yeah, well, I think that's interesting, and it's surprising that he didn't. If only
I don't know, he
because. Okay, well then, let's just pretend he wasn't, and then damn him for it.
He's still a jerk.
Honestly, he's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't. So we might as well just admit that. But I'm thinking Kevin McCarthy has really supremely screwed up in the past rather spectacularly when Ukrainian dignitaries have showed up asking for help against Russia. I just want to remind everybody of that stupid conversation that he got in the newspaper for because he said he thinks Putin pays Trump was really that was his basically him being stuck in fart mode when everybody else was discussing the plight of the Ukrainians. The rest of the Republican leadership saying, there's a serious situation there. We really need to lend them our support. And in fact, some of them saying, the only people who are lending them support is us. We're the only ones standing up for them. And Kathy McMorris Rogers saying, no, but we're not. We're not doing it. We're not doing anything. We're not doing nearly enough. We need to be doing a lot more. It's a very serious situation. But it was the assumption of Paul Ryan and others that, well, of course, wherever there's a fight for freedom against Russia, the United States is there doing its part. We're not. And that sort of revealed a weird foreshadowing of the split between Republicans that we didn't even know was coming yet, I guess. That, of course, it was the assumption of the Paul Ryan crowd that we would be doing something about it. But the reality was, bringing up the rear, the Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise crowd were actually not interested in helping Ukraine for various reasons. And then when it all got too embarrassing, fart mode kicks in and he blurts out that Putin's paying Trump and the whole meeting is over. I want everybody to remember that. That's what happened at that meeting. And every time at that point, it was the Ukrainian prime minister coming to the United States to beg for assistance and attention on the problem that was being ignored here in the United States. And then Then, inadvertently, McCarthy reveals, well, part of the reason it's being ignored here is that the Republican nominee for president, who, surprising everyone, will end up winning, is pro-Russian, specifically, probably because he's getting paid by Vladimir Putin, and there's going to be no help for the Ukrainians. And that's a pretty... And here they are now. It's all overt, and everyone can see what the problem is, and still Kevin McCarthy cannot focus on it.
Right. And then the other news probably has to do with the, again, we talked a little bit about both of these yesterday, the continued fallout both with Trump's taxes and with the January 6th committee report,
yes,
which was supposed to be released yesterday but will be released today. They say it was because there was a toner error.
Really? Like Maricopa County ballots?
So, well, they didn't specifically mention toner, but they said that the official government printing bureau,
the government printing office,
ready.
GPO. What's wrong with you guys?
Yeah, so that'll have to be looked at.
All right, have an inquiry.
But it should be out today. And I'm reading from John Weiler, who is a political scientist who has written books about authoritarianism and who I've interviewed. Oh. And I always find his takes interesting. He's looking at the January 6th committee. And he's looking back because he's been writing about it. And he points out kind of an interesting thing, a different way of looking at it, and that is that since the hearings wrapped up, events have actually overtaken the committee's work. He says
Already?
Attorney General Merrick Garland's appointed a special counsel, for example, to investigate multiple possible crimes. So, yeah, they could make a criminal referral. Doesn't really matter. They already have a special counsel looking into it.
Well, they would know what office to send the referral to.
The midterm elections saw a sweeping repudiation of election deniers generally and most of Trump's highest profile endorsees specifically. Trump appears to be in a much weaker position politically, a point I've made on this show, than he was when the hearings began, but the fundamental elements of Trumpism that help engender the Capitol attack, the nihilistic reality denial and appetite for violence fueled stoking of chaos remains pervasive on the American right, which is why it's so important that the GOP didn't show up last night. Indeed, the new House majority, they would have showed up for Arban from Hungary.
Oh, yeah, probably.
Indeed, the new House majority will likely spend the bulk of its energy in the next 2 years further perpetuating those core features of Trumpism, even if Trump himself fails to attain the 2024 nomination, again proving the fourth law of robotics, that which wins Republican primaries loses general elections, and the GOP and the House are hell-bent on proving it again. But to repeat, Jonathan Weiler says, none of that should obscure the important work the committee did. It's created a detailed, compelling historical record of an attempted coup that the former president and his henchpeople did everything in their power to bring to fruition and communicated forcefully and clearly the stakes of letting the attempted coup fade from memory. Hey, it may even block Romney McDaniel from being reelected. Who knows? Remain in a precarious state, says he. But if the committee contributed even in a small way to inching us back from the precipice of a much uglier political reality, we owe them a debt of gratitude. That includes people like Liz Cheney, who you may not like.
Okay, well,
just saying.
She can collect her debt of gratitude COD in Wyoming next month.
Right, and that's a good setup for the lightning round stuff I'm going to do between now and whenever I'm done.
Okay, the Blitzen round because of the season.
Yeah, Donner and Blitzen. Yeah. So, big trouble looming for Fox News. Dominion voting systems, this is from TPM, Dominion voting system seems to be gaining some traction in its billion-dollar defamation lawsuit against Fox News. It's tangentially related to January 6th and other things. The company presented evidence in court Wednesday, that would be yesterday, to establish that Fox News figures knew the claims about Dominion were false but aired them anyway. I didn't believe for 1 second, Sean Hannity reportedly said in his Dominion deposition.
Okay.
How do they know that they didn't believe it? Because they said they didn't believe it.
No. Well, there you go.
Under oath.
I'm surprised that he didn't believe it, quite honestly.
The whole thing about being under oath, what you say on TV versus under oath, you know?
They should why don't we just put TV under oath?
You mentioned George Santos. Still more stuff coming out there.
Yes.
Serial fabulous George Santos, the incoming GOP congressman from a Queens district, turns out Congressman-elect George Santos lied about his grandparents fleeing anti-Jewish persecution during World War II.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot. I got more. I'll do it in the
Openly
second
gay
hour. There you
Representative-elect
go.
George Santos
Aw,
didn't
man.
disclose his divorce with a woman.
Yes. Now, you don't supposed to have to disclose that necessarily, but remember
It's just,
that's part of his
in terms
resume.
of who you are and who you claim you are.
Yeah, right. So he's now the openly gay candidate, and it turns out he has been, and that's possible too, right? You discover you're gay later. Okay, I'm
Right.
just saying it's an important part of your story, and you could have been more. As long as
Remember
you're being
first they
openly
came for the
gay, you might
trade
as well be
unions?
open
Remember
about the
that-
other part
that
too.
poem that we did?
What?
First they came and
Oh, yes.
I didn't say anything. The Republican Jewish
I lied
Coalition
about-
said these allegations, if true, about George Santos are deeply troubling.
They are. Thank you, Susan Collins. I didn't realize that she was working with them on this one, but yeah, I have a couple. Yeah, well, I've got some articles. We'll go into all the detail about it in the second hour. But it is. I mean, like I said, this whole thing. My new theory is that there is no George Santos. He's an artificial intelligence chatbot, or at the very least, his resume was written by one, where they just said, "Well, what would it take to win a close-in New York City suburb as a Republican?" And the answer is, how about if he's gay and not gay, Jewish and Catholic, immigrant and native-born,
He was a man
Wall
of the
Street,
people who worked for Goldman Sachs.
Wall Street worker, but also cat rescuer. Yeah, exactly. And it's starting to turn out that I don't know. I will say this: I've never been in the same room with George Santos. That doesn't mean he's me. In fact, nobody's ever been in a room with George Santos. I think he may be Max Headroom.
There's a continued and continuing under the radar discussion, and I'll tell you why it's under the radar, about who's responsible for not knowing about all of this stuff. With the people who worked on the opponent Zimmerman campaign saying, we did the Oppo research. You keep saying Oppo research wasn't done.
Yeah.
We did it. We just couldn't get anybody to bite on it.
Yeah, that's what they're
And
saying.
the media not covering it because they're the ones that didn't bite.
Right.
And that's why it's under the radar.
It's a good point. And if they're pushing back, I think I saw the other day tweets from New York Times staffers saying, it's
here's
not
a list of all the outlets that didn't cover it besides us.
Yeah, well, that and why didn't you go to them? And by the way, when was the last time you paid for your local paper? Because then they would have the resources to do this. And
Well,
everybody's
I feel
like,
obligated to point out that I subscribe to a lot of different local
You
papers
do.
where I'm not even local, and therefore I am
You get the right to say
qualified
it.
because
yeah,
I therefore do subscribe to local stuff to say, yeah, you're full of it.
yeah. Well, apparently,
And I
that's
do think
true.
it's a good idea to subscribe to local papers. And
It
still,
is.
I can't believe none of these people covered this stuff. This
That's
was a
true,
story.
too. The word was, I think he was trying to claim that Newsday, which is the Long Island regional paper, did cover it, but they're firewalled, and so it might be the case that a lot of people didn't discover it there. But if they did pay for it, then they would have seen it. But then it was also pointed out, you know what else could be considered a local paper for this New York seat? The New York Times.
Right.
What do you know?
Right. So I will accept that sometimes it takes time to vet this, but I will not accept the fact that they had no responsibility
years.
whatsoever and it was everybody else's fault, because that's a typical newspaper reporter line when anybody says, well, you didn't do something you should have.
Yeah.
You don't understand the news business.
I guess that's true. Although it is also a fallback. We are all always saying, "How come you didn't?" Well, you could have. I guess I could have done opposition research on the New York 3rd Congressional District,
Well,
but
they
I
didn't come
opted
to us
not
with
to.
it. We would
It's
have
true.
published it.
Yeah, that's true. I would have said, "This is a good story." They've come to it with it now, and I read it every day.
Right. And then one thing other to mention, this IRS stuff.
Yes.
Again,
Sure.
I'm still confused. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an expert on government procedure. And the
Title
difference
42.
between a program at the IRS,
Yeah.
which mandatorily looks at presidential tax returns, versus a law, meaning that if you didn't do it, you're subject to prosecution,
Right.
is a minor distinction in many people's minds. But the point here
The minor
is
distinction.
that the IRS, in fact, audited Obama and Biden, but not Trump.
Yes, and
So the
there may
program
be
wasn't
news on that
broken,
front.
in other words, because they did Biden.
Yeah, they just forgot.
They just didn't.
It was a glitch. That
Why didn't they?
They did.
Was Louis DeJoy running the IRS at the time?
Yes.
I mean, that's the question that comes up. And
I
it's a
think there's
good
an answer.
question, and it needs an answer.
I think there is one. Where did I put it? I think it's here from, via Brian Beutler, I learn that Maggie Haberman has this to say. In light of the news that the IRS did not audit Trump as required, until Neil asked about the audits in 2019, she is, on Twitter, re-upping this scoop with Nick Fandos that that year, 2019, about Trump leaning on McConnell to prioritize confirming the IRS General Counsel. That doesn't immediately make sense, but in the body of the article, it appears that two important nominations were then pending, one for the IRS General Counsel and the other was Bill Barr for Attorney General. And that for some reason, Trump leans on McConnell and says, do this IRS General Counsel first before the Attorney General. And then, of course, the guy lands at the IRS and then a decision is then pending on, all right, are we going to cave to pressure and start these audits that we're supposed to have been doing these last 2 years, or can we find a legalistic reason not to do it? New general counsel at the IRS, who Trump just basically personally placed there and prioritized over the attorney general for some strange reason. They have to work on developing that storyline, but I guess that's what she'll be up to, and she'll be doing it in local paper, New York Times.
Right. So a very smart New York Times reporter, I know he's smart because his name is Charlie Smart, has a little list here of the top line numbers from Trump's 2015-2020 tax returns.
Yes.
0 paid in 2020.
Right.
16 and 17, he paid $750. He paid a lot in other years, but is asking for a refund. He basically loses money, especially in his prize golf courses, and there's still a lot more information to come.
All right. Yeah, so not only does he pay $0 in 2020, his last year of the presidency, he's asking for a $5 million refund.
Because he was losing money.
Right. Well, it's a tough...
He lost $32 million in 2016 and $4 million in 2020.
Yeah, well, I don't ask for it back from the government, but I guess I should.
Well, he's rich.
Yeah, that's the way it works for those guys.
He says
all
so.
right. Well, that's true. You may be
so
lying.
Rich he loses money every year.
Okay.
That's how rich he is.
Ho, ho, ho. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show on the Netroots Radio, I guess. Or maybe I'm the show on Netroots Radio is the more expansive, sovereign entity in all of this. All right, much to follow up on, and maybe we'll get back to and read that re-upped New York Times piece just to make it a little clearer. I guess we should do it just because it's now, I guess you could call it top of mind. Just to sort of clarify, and it's not entirely clear because, remember, this is an older article. This is from April 4th, 2019. And they're only just now looking back and saying that this then puzzling issue might be explained by the fact that there was these missing audits, and maybe the thinking, if I understand this correctly, maybe the thinking is if they put this nominee in place, Michael Desmond is his name, if they put this guy in place, he will come up with some sort of mechanism for the IRS to use to continue to refuse to do these supposedly mandatory audits. I think that's the insinuation. It's not established in this article. And maybe what we really should be doing is looking over at Maggie Haberman's timeline to see if she has any further explanation about this and has some further context and can connect more dots. But we'll start with the first dot. Trump asked that confirmation of IRS counsel be a priority. Again, Haberman and Nick Fandos on this piece. President Trump earlier this year, 2019, asked Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, see, they tell you that, but they won't tell you what Title 42 is, to prioritize a confirmation vote for his nominee to be the chief counsel of the Internal Revenue Service, indicating that it was a higher priority than voting on the nomination of William P. Barr as Attorney General. A person familiar with the conversation said, "Who are these people who are familiar with this conversation?" But a typical source for a Maggie Haberman story. White House aides insisted for months that the confirmation of the nominee, Michael J. Desmond, a tax lawyer from Santa Barbara, California, was a top priority after passage of the tax bill in 2017. But the request by Mr. Trump made to Mr. McConnell on February 5th raised questions about whether the president had other motivations. So they're already asking this question. Because it is odd, right? Why the IRS General Counsel before the Attorney General? For months, the president has seethed over vows by congressional Democrats that they would move to obtain his tax returns from the IRS. And this week, the House Ways and Means Committee Chairman, Representative Richard E. Neal, Democrat of Massachusetts, formally asked the IRS for 6 years of the returns using an obscure provision in the tax code to do so. It wasn't so obscure. I absolutely knew of its existence well before this controversy. And, cause, I don't know, it's been used before. I don't know. But that's the thing you say. Troubled rocker Tommy Lee, obscure provision, this thing. The Ukraine. On Thursday, asked if he would direct the IRS not to disclose his tax returns, Mr. Trump said Democrats would have to talk to his lawyers. The answer to that being yes, they are. They'll speak to my lawyers, Mr. Trump said during remarks at the Oval Office. They'll speak to the Attorney General, except we won't have one until we finish with this nomination first. In July, when Mr. Desmond was first being considered by the Senate Finance Committee, Bloomberg reported that he had briefly advised the Trump administration on tax issues before Mr. Trump took office. Oh, the Trump Organization. Did I say administration? I don't know. Maybe I read it right. Trump Organization on tax issues before Trump took office. James Wilkinson, a spokesman for Mr. Desmond, told Bloomberg that Mr. Desmond had helped with a discrete reporting matter for a subsidiary company that was resolved with no tax impact. That sounds like it might not actually be true, but there you have it. Okay. Let's see. In private practice, Mr. Desmond worked for a time alongside William Nelson. Willie Nelson? Really? And Sherry Dillon, who we remember with the blank pages, right, at that press conference. Sherry Dillon, who currently serves as tax counsel to the Trump Organization. The IRS Chief Counsel advises the agency director on, quote, all matters pertaining to the interpretation, administration, and enforcement of the Internal Revenue Code, as well as other legal matters. According to a description of the agency's website, the Chief Counsel reports jointly to the Director of the IRS and the Treasury Department's General Counsel. The Senate did not immediately act on Mr. Trump's request. It first moved ahead with Mr. Barr's nomination. Desmond was confirmed 2 weeks later on February 27th. So he didn't get his way on that for some strange reason. I mean, a good reason, I think, but his request was made for a strange reason. Trump and his team have been warily anticipating the probing demands of House investigators since Democrats won control in November. The message to Mr. McConnell came around the time that Mr. Trump, eyeing a torrent of new House investigations led by Democrats, told reporters that he was unfairly under fire. He appeared to take particular umbrage at an inquiry by the House Intelligence Committee focused on potential ties to Russia, as well as accusations of potential money laundering by Trump's businesses and his associates. It's called presidential harassment. It is not called that, but and it's unfortunate, and it really does hurt our country. The president directly relayed his concern about the prompt confirmation of Desmond to McConnell around the time that Trump was preparing to deliver his State of the Union address. The person said. Hogan Gidley, a White House deputy press secretary, declined to discuss the specifics of the conversation between Trump and McConnell, instead lying about Democrats. Democrats have obstructed and delayed a record number of President Trump's well-qualified nominees. I thought that he had a record number of nominations processed. So it shouldn't be surprising to anyone that he regularly communicates with Majority Leader McConnell about how to increase confirmations in the face of Democrats' ridiculous behavior, Mr. Gidley said. David Popp, a spokesman for McConnell, also declined to comment, but according to a person familiar with what took place, who's familiar with what took place? Mr. Trump told McConnell that Desmond was growing frustrated with the holdup. Oh, no, I didn't realize that was a problem for you, Mr. Desmond. Maybe you should talk to Merrick Garland about that. And was contemplating withdrawing from the process. Oh, my. Democrats in the House are relying on a little-known provision, it's known, I knew it, of the federal tax code to try to view Mr. Trump's personal and business tax returns, the provision added in the 1920s because Teapot Dome, still not said, gives the chairman of the Congress's tax writing committees, including the Joint Committee on Taxation, but they say, including the Democrat-led Ways and Means Committee in the House, the premier tax writing committee, like including it. Oh, it also happens to include it. It's where all tax provisions are supposed to begin constitutionally, but screw that. It came from the 1920s, but never mind the fact that it was one of the biggest scandals in American history involving presidential corruption and the targeted usage of the IRS. Whatever. Let's leave all of that out. But we'll quote some people who are close to the situation. That gets in there. The text of the law does not give the Trump administration clear grounds to deny a request from Mr. Neal. That's an interesting way of getting around to it. The text of the law leaves no doubt as to whether or not the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is entitled by law to get what he requests. But it's an interesting way of putting it, that the law doesn't give the Trump administration clear grounds to deny. It's clear that there are no grounds to deny is really what the answer is. And 4 years later, we found out that, yeah, that was right. Anyway, the text of the law, very weirdly, does not give the Trump administration clear grounds to deny a request from Mr. Neal, saying only that when requested, the Treasury Secretary shall furnish the information. Like, that's not hard to understand, right? But Treasury Department officials are making preparations to challenge any requests coming from Mr. Neal. They would most likely argue that his action is politically motivated, not related to real matters of policy, and therefore illegitimate. They did, in fact, argue that and lost. Mr. Trump asked on Wednesday, this is way back when, about the request by reporters during an Oval Office event, maintained that he was still being audited, which he wasn't. Now we know that. A claim he has made for years to defend not releasing his tax returns as previous presidents have done. And now, so again, let's just remind everybody what's actually happening here is he's not being audited, and he's looking to put this other guy in charge of the IRS General Counsel's office for a number of reasons. One, to resist the the demands being lawfully made by the chair of the Ways and Means Committee for his tax returns. And two, I guess, presumably to either keep them from starting up the audits as they now say they're going to do because they got found out, or can we do something to redirect the audits or make sure they come out right or whatever happens. So anyway, right now it's just insinuated that there's a connection. We'll see if Haberman has anything to say about that now. I don't think so. I don't know. All right, well, I'm looking at what is she talking about right now, or her latest tweets. But so far it appears, no, they are about other items, although some of these are pretty interesting. So there's nothing since she said that earlier today in light of the news that the IRS did not audit Trump as required, re-upping the scoop, but no further comment on it. Although she does have something, well, she's passing on other people's work here too. All right, I'll keep her page open just in case something else comes through. Now I'm going to shift gears, although, let's see, Greg has been sending some other things around that might be of some interest here. Oh, well, that was an interesting one, but a totally different subject. And let's see. Why did, okay, maybe of interest, and this is the same topic, so perhaps we will pick this one up. What are we looking at here? Is this a Substack or something? Oh, it's just somebody's blog. What? Dan Kennedy. All right, Dan Kennedy, who is probably going to tell us what kind of person he is somewhere along the line here, but it's at dankennedy.net, so he's a very self-centered person, but he might have the qualifications to make it worthwhile to be self-centered in that way. All right, what are we looking at here? Greg says it's on the same subject. Why did a House committee, who is this committee, release Trump's tax returns? And the answer is because it could. That's pretty good. A short little piece here. Let's take a look at this. I've been talking about, oh, okay, he's going to send it. He's sent me the description of who is Dan Kennedy. I mean, he's Dan Kennedy. It doesn't really apply in the same way here, but he is a professor at Northeastern University's School of Journalism, specializing in opinion journalism and alternative business models for news. He writes a weekly column on media and politics for the GBH News website, and he has contributed articles to a number of other publications, including ones you've heard of. They're very big and large, and it's great. Okay, so what's the one he's contributing now to his own website? And the answer is, why did the House committee cross the road? And the answer is because it could. All right. I've been talking about this on Mastodon, and Facebook. Oh, boo. And most people seem to be unexercised about it, but I don't understand the rationale for releasing Donald Trump's tax returns to the public. I've seen people worrying about that too, and I get it. And I'm not 100% certain it was fully justified either by the committee or by our discussion, but I also don't care a great deal. And I know that that's now going to escalate into tit for tat, but we explained why I explained why it's not really tit for tat, or if it is, it's been going on for a long time. But still, I'm not certain there's a great justification. So I'm a little bit surprised that they did, in fact, decide to release them publicly. But it might be that they are, well, I don't know. I mean, it might be one that there's really no damage done by doing that. None to Democratic presidential candidates anyway, because they all plan on releasing their tax information. But anyway, he says they did it because they could, but he doesn't really understand why did they want to. When Trump refused to release them during his 2 presidential campaigns, he wasn't violating any law or regulation. That's true. He was simply violating a norm. He has not been charged with a crime for that, I guess. There is no connection between the House Ways and Means Committee's investigation into whether the IRS was auditing him while he was president, as it was supposed to do but didn't, and its decision to make his returns public. I mean, it's true. You could just release the information that, hey, they were supposed to be auditing him and they weren't, and that's a big scandal all by itself, without releasing the returns. So I guess we're still missing well, this is interesting. We're missing the legislative purpose or investigative purpose for their releasing the information. But and all he does is, there's one more paragraph. He says, all I can come up with is that the committee has the right to do so, and that Democratic members decided they'd better do it now before the Republicans take control in a few weeks. And that's it. That's all he's saying. And that's a very, that's a big blanket statement, and it's probably, well, therefore covers the truth at some point. And Greg's offering a rationale here too. You can call back and give me the rationale. It is, well, let's see. It's a rule and tradition, should be a law, and we do legislation, so this provides continuity for when it's finally passed. After all, we got them to do a new law. That's Greg's explanation for the rationale. There will likely be a law, requiring the audits, and or a law requiring the disclosure. And since we're working towards it, this provides continuity. Other people did it voluntarily. Now we have to do it mandatorily. And in the meantime, we're going to fill in the gap by disclosing them against his will. Okay. So that's a real possibility. Although I was going to use a technical explanation, which is, I guess, another way of saying they did it because they can. Right? Watch this one. All right. So the rule is there's supposed to be, it's a couple of rules here. One, the president and vice president are supposed to be getting audited. This president, for some reason, was not getting audited. Okay, but you could just release that information. Yes, that's true. They could do that. Why release the returns, though? Just to drive the point home, perhaps. One, that he's been hiding something this whole time. Two, he may run again, and it's important for you to know what he was hiding this whole time. So there's lots of other interesting reasons, but is there a legislative purpose or an investigative purpose closely enough related to it that you could justify it? And the answer is, it needs no justification. What needed justification was moving them from the IRS into the hands of the Ways and Means chairman, right? So think of this as a several-step process. The IRS has got them. They're covered by, whatever confidentiality rules there are. But then, of course, who cares what the rules are, because one of the other rules was you're supposed to be auditing the president and you weren't doing that. But okay, two wrongs don't make a right. Sure. Anyway, even though everything is apparently, tit for tat is apparently a legitimate mode of operation, and presumably in these situations, both the tit and the tat are wrong, and two wrongs apparently do make a right, or at least they make it right to report on as both sides do it. But, okay, back to the issue at hand. The returns are filed, they're with the IRS, they're held in confidence. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee says, I would like to see these returns. The IRS says, no. The chairman says, well, there's a law that says I can ask for it. And the IRS says, well, you can ask for it, but there needs to be, we think, a legitimate legislative purpose and a legitimate or oversight purpose for making the request. And at this point, the chair then says, I'm making the request because I want to know, well, see, I guess the real problem is at this point, he says, I want to know about the effectiveness of this IRS rule that requires that presidents and vice presidents be audited. At which point, really, the IRS should have said, well, so your question is, are we auditing him? And the answer is no, surprisingly. And that puts us maybe on a bad footing, but it doesn't explain why you want to see his tax returns. What you want is the answer to the question, are we auditing him? And for whatever reason, they continue and they say, well, no, we think the fuller answer would be provided by having his tax returns in hand. Now, I don't know whether that's really true or not, but they did litigate it for 3.5 years and won. So we have an answer from the courts that stands in for the logical answer of whether or not it is absolutely necessary for them to get these returns. The court says they can have them. So now that question is settled, and the returns move from IRS custody to Ways and Means custody. They're now in the hands of the Ways and Means Committee. They can do it. And again, the rule is in order to move them from the IRS to the Ways and Means, you have to show legislative purpose or oversight purpose. They kind of made a claim about what it was. The IRS disputed it. The IRS lost in court. There's nothing, though, in that rule or anywhere else that says once it's in the hands of the Ways and Means Committee, what they can and can't do with it. It's a different question. There isn't anything anywhere that says there needs to be a legitimate legislative purpose for them to release them. What it says is that there needs to be a legitimate and it doesn't even say this, but it's interpreted as saying that there needs to be a legitimate legislative reason for requesting them. They've now established that in court. The request is granted. Here they are. It doesn't say what happens after them. What there is in the Constitution, of course, is that even if it is otherwise illegal to release that information, if a member of Congress releases it as part, under the speech and debate clause, they can't be prosecuted for it. So that's the end of that question. But yeah, I guess it's sort of a fancier way of saying because they can. They did it because they could. They had the right to do so, and they wanted to. I know it worries him that there's no legislative purpose, but that was the previous question. The legislative purpose that was supposed to attach to the request to the IRS from Ways and Means. There isn't anything, and there's no case law and no body of precedent to suggest that there needs to be a legitimate legislative or investigative reason for releasing the information. But I guess if investigative will do, then there's this. So we investigated two things. One, whether or not he was under audit, and two, whether or not he was really paying enough taxes or was using loopholes to try to escape paying taxes. We found some stuff out, and we found it out on your dime. Would you like to know, as owner of the report, what the report says? You would. Well, here it is. And that's all there is to it. So, okay, like I said, it's another way of explaining that they had the right to do so, and that's the only reason that they really need. Well, Greg continues to send a couple of things on here. Oh, more about Title 42. All right, Matt, we may save for if we get a chance to record something for tomorrow's show. Tomorrow we'll have to be off the air live. I know, but everyone probably wants to go out and go shopping anyway, so it's just as well. That's not what we're doing, but it's going to be tight. Now, whether or not I'm going to be able to get that in there, I don't know. All right, well, Greg's making the case for this thing, Title 42 being breaking news. Oh, or is this the breaking news here? Oh, the omnibus is going to pass. Okay, thanks to cinema. Oh, this really has broken the news. All right, what's going on here? Schumer breaks Title 42 spending bill logjam with something, and something that involved Kyrsten Sinema. I'll just read the text that he's sent from out of this piece here. Senate Majority Leader Charles Schumer, he's from New York, announced Thursday morning, that's today, that he's reached an agreement with colleagues on amendments to the 4,155-page omnibus, so the Senate can pass the bill later in the day, that's this day, and give the House a chance to act on the Friday. And it looks like his savior may be independent Senator Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. Interesting, by the way, they could just put her as Arizona, but they move it out front on this one, who on Thursday introduced an amendment to increase border funding and resources for border communities and extend the Title 42 health policy that expedites the deportation of migrants seeking asylum in the United States, in case you didn't know what it did. Sinema's amendment could give political cover to centrist Democrats to vote against a proposal sponsored by Senator Mike Lee of Utah to cut funding for Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas' office unless the Biden administration reinstates the Trump-era Title 42 policy. So, okay, there you go. She brings home bacon for Arizona, an important slice, if you will, but then extends Title 42 so that they don't have to deal with or can dismiss and vote against Mike Lee's amendment that would cut funding for a Homeland Security Secretary unless 42 gets extended. Okay, that's right. So Schumer breaks Title 42 spending bill logjam with Sinema's help. All right. There. News broken. I mean, I don't know what else to say about it, but it's important to know. And now I need to turn to the insane story of George Santos. This guy is crazy, if he is in fact a person at all. I'm standing by my call that this is an AI chatbot, or that at the very least there may be a real person, but he might be putting in, whatever this new chatbot craze is. He's, I think, telling him, what do I say if I want to win? Or what do I say if I want to get out of this logjam? And the answer is just tell them you identify as everything, and then everything will be fine. All right. Oops. What have I? Dang. What was I? This must be the Twitter thread. Okay. Okay. Never mind. I got it. So now back over to what I put away. So yesterday's news that broke after the show was this one here. It's in The Forward, which is like a Jewish news publication, kind of an oddball one, by the way. Is this one going to give me firewall problems now? All right, we'll read it here. George Santos, among other things, also lied about his grandparents fleeing anti-Jewish persecution during World War II. Andrew Silverstein writing this piece for The Forward. Congressman-elect George Santos' emotional narrative of having Jewish grandparents who fled Europe during World War II appears to be untrue, like much of the rest of his campaign biography, according to genealogy websites reviewed by The Forward. Who are these genealogy websites? We might even actually find out. But remember, this is part of his incredible claim to be both Jewish and Catholic and an immigrant and not an immigrant and all these sorts of things. Oh, we're going to run out of time? Dang. But just for the break. Okay, I was afraid it was all of a sudden 10:57. It is in fact 10:27. All right. So we'll read on a little bit more. So Santos, a Long Island Republican, maybe, who knows, said that his father was Catholic and his mother was Jewish, and that both faiths, quote, are mine. Okay. The very first line of the About George page on his campaign website. Ooh, I'm a little late. says George's grandparents fled Jewish persecution in, you'll never believe it, Ukraine. And then they settled in Belgium, which is also hard to believe, and again fled persecution during World War II. But the website myheritage.com, now we know which website we're talking about, lists Santos's maternal grandparents as having both been born in Brazil before the Nazis rose to power. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let me get this thing out of the way here so we can continue with this crazy story about one of several crazy stories about George Santos. But again, just a reminder from up at the top, Santos has said that his father was Catholic and his mother was Jewish, and that happens fairly frequently, especially these days, and so it's certainly possible that he could be brought up in both faiths. You know, there are examples to be found all over the place, like, let's say, my house, for instance, right? That has happened, right? So I wouldn't say, though, that my kids would not say both faiths are mine. They haven't been raised as Catholics. But you know, our production staff here at Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters is of mixed religious background. We'll say it that way. So I understand. It happens. Could be, right? Let's find out more. Why is this of interest? Well, read on. So, Santos says his father's Catholic, mom's Jewish. Both faiths are mine. Certainly could be the case. It's a little confusing. I wouldn't recommend it, but people do different things. The very first line of the About George page on his campaign website states, George's grandparents fled Jewish persecution in Ukraine. Now, presumably this means we're talking about George's mother's parents, right? George's father's Catholic, mom's Jewish, grandparents, we don't know which ones, fled Jewish persecution in Ukraine. I think we're supposed to take from that that is mom's grandparents who were Jewish in Ukraine and fled persecution, unless the claim is like now when this all collapses, they could say, no, they were fleeing Jewish persecution in Ukraine, meaning they were being persecuted by Ukrainian Jews for being so Catholic or whatever it was that they were, see? And then they went to Belgium, and again, they had to flee persecution during World War II. This time the persecution of Nazis persecuting Belgians because they were Belgian, not because they were, Jewish or anything else, were invading Belgium. So, that's oppression. Okay, true, it is. But the website myheritage.com blows up this narrative we were assuming about these people by listing Santos's maternal grandparents as having both been born in Brazil before the Nazis rose to power, which was an interesting place to land, given the number of Nazis who then later followed them to Brazil in the years to come. Anyway, never mind all of that. Let's see. And, whoops. How did I turn my camera on? That's wrong. But so they're both born in Brazil. So that sort of rules out the flee the Nazis thing. If you were in Brazil, you didn't have to flee, persecution in Ukraine because you weren't in Ukraine. You were in Brazil. And you also didn't have to flee from Belgium because, again, Brazil. is where you were. His grandfather, ready for some Brazilian names? Paulo Horta de Volder. Remember that last name? Okay. His grandfather, Paulo Horta de Volder, was born in Brazil in 1918. So, actually sort of pre-Weimar Republic even. he's out of there, not just fleeing the Nazis. His grandmother, Rosalina Caruso Horta de Volder, was born in Rio in 1927. So both born in Brazil, even before World War II. Okay, so an online obituary for Santos's mother. Remember his Jewish mother? His Jewish mom, Fatima Aziza Caruso Horta de Volder. Okay, funny, you don't sound Jewish. Who died in 2016. Says she was born in, remember this city, Niterói, maybe, a suburb of Rio de Janeiro, on December 22nd. Oh, well, happy birthday, although she died in 2016. This would have been her birthday. And George, he's not answering calls about this tonight because, he's more, thinking about his mom who died 4, 5, 6 years ago. Was born on this date. Born, though, to Paulo, and Rosalina de Volder in 1962. So, who cares, right? I mean, it's nice and all that, and happy birthday and everything. But remember, Jewish Fatima. There's very few, I think, Jewish Fatimas out there, but you never know. But Fatima's not that long gone, right? She died in 2016. And while we mourn her passing, no doubt she left behind, because she died in 2016, a Facebook page. As frequently happens, these things are left behind after death. But, I mean, she lived well into, how old was she? Still, kicking and active at the time, and had a Facebook page. And so I guess now you go and you take a look at the Facebook page to try and find out more about George, since he's just a mystery. Well, what do you find on her Facebook page? Well, here's what they found. Photos of her with Santos, George, and tags to his page. But there are no mentions anywhere, as there might not be necessarily, right? No mentions anywhere of being Jewish, or the words Jew or Jewish, nor other search terms that the forward researchers, I guess, thought prudent to look for, which is an odd list. I mean, it makes a certain amount of sense, but it's just a weird list to pluck out of thin air. But I guess, it won't be because they have no familiarity with, or only a passing familiarity with, Judaism that they chose these terms. They're looking for any mentions of the word Jew or Jewish, or the terms Yom Kippur, Shabbat, or Israel in either English or Portuguese. Now, I mean, if there's extensive discussion of Tu B'Shvat, or, other holidays, Purim, but just not Yom Kippur, Shabbat, or Israel. I don't know how comprehensive researching this is, but at any rate, what they're trying to say is there's no reference at all to her being Jewish, which, okay, it's not overt for everybody. But 4 of the 7 pages that she liked were for Catholic groups, and another was for a Brazilian priest and singer. She regularly shared posts with Catholic themes and images of Jesus, which is not something that Jewish people typically do, including one 8 months before her death from a Brazilian Christian group, Tarde com Maria, which is Afternoons with Maria. We'll get back to that in a second, but this weird construction of this sentence, right? Including, she posted all sorts of Catholic themes, including one 8 months before her death from a Catholic Christian group. That is to say, it was what she posted was from the Catholic Christian group. Her death wasn't from the Brazilian Christian group. That does make it sound like they killed her or caused her death. Tarde com Maria, Afternoons with Maria. It says in Portuguese, the cross of Christ for some is a symbol of defeat. For us, who says that? For us, it is a symbol of salvation. Another adapts a quote from Genesis, There's an angel today delivering all from evil. Now, a quote from Genesis could be by anybody, but I will say that it is unlikely that a Jewish person would post the meme that the cross of Christ for some is a symbol of defeat. For us, it is a symbol of salvation. Of course, pointedly for Jewish people, it is not a symbol of salvation. But I would also say I have some questions about who think it's a symbol of defeat. Like, well, Jesus died on a cross, so there you go. It's a symbol of defeat. I don't think anybody really takes it that way, even non-Christians. But anyway, a chorus of constituents and government watchdogs have called for Santos to step aside. No way he's doing that. Or for Congress to refuse to seat him in January. No way they're doing that either, because, of course, it'll be a Republican majority, presumably. I guess, I don't know, maybe all of them get indicted before now, or between now and January 3rd. But they're not going to give up a seat when things are so tight as it is with their majority. So, no, don't look for Congress to refuse to seat him in January, even though there has been this blockbuster New York Times investigation released on Monday, reporting that much of his storybook biography, his AI chatbot biography, appears to have been made up. The Times said that neither Baruch College, which Santos says he graduated from in 2010, nor Citigroup and Goldman Sachs, where Santos said he had worked, had any record of him. Even the animal rescue group that he said he founded does not appear to exist. A lawyer for Santos dismissed the report as a shotgun blast of attacks. I mean, there had to be a shotgun blast of attacks because there were so many targets and you need to spread those pellets out. It's not our fault that it was that the shotgun was the best weapon for the situation. And they were defamatory allegations. We'll see about that. He then repeated a common misattribution to Winston Churchill of a line that originated actually in an 1845 essay by Victor Hugo, which says, "You have enemies? Good. It means that you've stood up for something sometime in your life." So everyone enjoyed the fact that the lawyer, who may or may not be a real person, also made up his quotes about when he was defending the made-up resume. He made up a quote that was supposed to offer a defense. Santos's campaign did not respond to the Forward's email inquiries on Tuesday regarding the false statements about his grandparents' birthplaces and backgrounds. On Monday, the Jewish Telegraphic Agency reported that Santos did not return emails sent to multiple addresses or messages sent through a number of social media platforms, and that his sister and lawyer also did not reply to email messages. Matt Brooks, the head of the Republican Jewish Coalition, told JTA in a text, "I asked him about this. He identifies as Jewish." Okay, maybe that's enough, right? Santos, who is 34, made history in November as the first openly gay, remember that, Republican to win a House seat as a non-incumbent, beating the Democrat, Robert Zimmerman, by 8 percentage points. That's a lot. His district, which spans much of Nassau County and some of Queens, is about 20% Jewish. He joined a Republican Jewish Coalition candle lighting ceremony on Long Island Sunday night alongside outgoing Representative Lee Zeldin, and last month was a featured speaker at the RJC's convention in Las Vegas, billed as one of 2 freshman Jewish Republicans, the other being Ohio's Max Miller. He campaigned heavily among Orthodox Jews, and after a Chabad event on November 3rd, tweeted, "It was an honor to address fellow members of the Jewish community in NY03. That was hashtag. New York's 3rd Congressional District is the reference there. In an interview with Jewish Insider, Santos described himself as a non-observant Jew. Okay, that happens too, right? And said his 4 visits to Israel were the most exciting experiences of his life. It might, even motivate somebody to become an observant Jew. You might say, why is it so exciting? Because I rediscovered my Jewish heritage. What are you going to do with it? Nothing. I'm going to go back to being non-observant. All right. I'm a history buff 4 times over. He goes to Israel because as a Republican, that's part of the necessary, catechism, really, to show that you support Israel. But it's very interesting that you would make 4 visits to Israel and say that they were the most exciting experiences of your life, but it doesn't motivate you to be any more observant as a Jew is interesting. He talked about spending Shabbat Why? Because who cares? He's not observant. He's about spending Shabbat and going to synagogue with Persian Jews in Great Neck, New York, in the district, and said he would treat all constituents fairly, regardless of their backgrounds. Well, gee whiz, thanks a lot. Whether my mother's Jewish background beliefs, which are mine, or my father's Roman Catholic beliefs, which are also mine, are represented or not, he'll still be fair, whether you're even if you're not Catholic or Jewish. I want to represent everyone else that practices every other religion to make sure everybody feels like they have a partner in me, which they do, because maybe you're gay. Well, I'm that. Maybe you're an immigrant. I'm that too. Maybe you're actually native born. I am also that. Maybe you went to college. So did I. Maybe you worked on Wall Street. Me too. Maybe you love animals. Same with me. He wants everybody to feel like they have a partner in him. But it appears Santos is not Jewish, and not just because not because his mom isn't, but all right. But we'll get to that in a second. He's not Jewish. And he lied, apparently, about his family fleeing persecution during the war. Neither of his maternal grandparents appear in Brazilian immigration cards in the 1930s or the 1940s, or in the databases of Yad Vashem or the U.S. Holocaust Museum Memorial, which lists European Jewish refugees. Rosalina's parents, his mom, right? Is that right? Or is that his... yeah, I guess so. Now I'm forgetting. Well, but her name was Fatima. But does she go by, is that her second name, Rosalina? Now I'm confused about who we're talking about. Yeah. This is his grandmother, right? Rosalina Caruso Horta de Volder. All right. So let's go back to that one and start reading this again. Right, but it appears Santos is not Jewish. He lied about his family fleeing persecution. No, neither of his maternal grandparents, remember his mom is supposed to be Jewish, appear in Brazilian immigration cards in the 30s or 40s or in any of the databases. Rosalina, his maternal grandmother's parents, Vicente Caruso, and Alzira. So again, let's keep in mind here, we're looking for Jewish heritage here, right? So Fatima, not a big Jewish name. But he says she's Jewish, but she posts all sorts of Catholic iconography on her Facebook page. Her mom is Rosalina. What about Rosalina's parents? Are they maybe European Jews? Vicente Caruso, plenty of Iberian, or families of Iberian extraction are in fact Jewish and don't sound like they would be necessarily from their name because of this. But it only goes so far. Like Vicente Caruso, maybe, right? What about Rosalina's mom, Alzira Santa Anna Caruso? Like there, I would say, well, that's certainly Iberian in origin, whether Portuguese or Spanish or whatever, but for that matter, Catalonian perhaps, or anything else. But among the Iberian Jews, only slightly less frequently used than Fatima would be Santa Anna. But okay, there you go. Anyway, so Rosalina's Jewish parents, Vicente Caruso and Alzira Santa Anna Caruso, were both in fact born in Brazil, according to myheritage.com, as was Paulo's mother, the maternal grandfather here, Maria Victoria Alexandra Horta de Fonesca. But Paulo's father, George Santos's great-grandfather, Leonard Antoine, or Ludovicus Thomas Horta de Volder, was an engineer born in Belgium. Okay, still no Ukraine here, but there's their Belgium connection. Born in Belgium in 1863. A 1954 article in the Rio newspaper Correio da Manhã, or Morning Mail, states that Leonard Antoine immigrated to Brazil in 1884 and later founded a school in the city of Petrópolis. Leonard and his wife Maria are also listed in 1928 church records of the marriage of their daughter. not temple records, church records. Santos may be named after him. His full name is George Anthony de Volder Santos. A second family tree on the French genealogy website, Geneanet, I don't know how they pronounce it in French, but anyway, created by one Gia Seerdsma. I don't know who that is, but they reference her as a distant Dutch relative of Santos. Dutch, not Belgian, but Dutch, corroborates Paulo's parentage and birthplace. This tree includes several photographs of Leonard, the engineer, and the group shot at the top of this article. There's a picture included you can take a look at. Sierdsma, who researched the family's lineage and archives in Antwerp, confirmed by email that the family does not have Ukrainian or Jewish roots. So that's a little weird in terms of claiming, well, I'm Jewish. Well, I'm half Jewish. Well, my mom was Jewish. Well, she's not Jewish. Well, her grandparents, well, they weren't. Well, they certainly fled Ukraine and then Belgium. Nah, they really didn't. Okay, that too all becomes problematic. But wait, there's more. Who is this person? So here's the new twist on this, offered up by the Daily Beast, and I have to check on something here. Is this, yeah, there's even a third one here, but let's go to this one. The Daily Beast offers us this from Roger Solenberger. Openly gay, and that's in scare quotes now, including the openly, Representative-elect George Santos didn't disclose divorce with woman. Now, again, I have to caution you, there are lots of people who discover late in life that they are either have things have changed or that they were always oriented differently than they actually married, and it was all maybe a desperate attempt to maintain appearances or stick with tradition. And if you're a Republican, you can see where that would be problematic for you. And then later you finally discover, I can't either. Enough with this, or there's space now for us to be openly gay and still be conservative Republicans. So fine. It's just, in light of everything else, you might take a more jaundiced view of that explanation. Santos ran his campaign, it says here in the subheader, as an openly gay Republican. Since he was elected, a number of key biographical details have started to crumble, and here's the latest one, and that's all we can say about it at this point. Republican Congressman-elect George Santos is under new scrutiny. After a New York Times report earlier this week uncovered a string of apparent outright fabrications at the heart of some of the most fundamental facts about his life, but that backstory may also be notable for what Santos did not include: a publicly undisclosed marriage. Santos, who claims he has, quote, never experienced discrimination in the Republican Party, broke barriers this year when he became the first openly gay, non-incumbent GOP candidate elected to Congress. Okay, great. But, according to court records obtained by the Daily Beast, Santos appeared to be the subject of a previously unacknowledged September 2019 divorce with a woman in Queens County, New York. The divorce, which Santos has not discussed publicly, adds new uncertainty to his already shaky biographical and political claim. I am openly gay, have never had an issue with my sexual identity in the past decade. Well, apparently you have. And I can tell you and assure you I will always be an advocate for LGBTQ folks, which may still be true. Santos told USA Today in October, responding to criticism about his support for, as an openly gay candidate, right, his support for Florida's so-called Don't Say Gay bill, signed into law this year by Governor Ron DeSantis. Well, that's a problematic stance all by itself. Less than 2 weeks after his divorce was finalized, Santos filed the official paperwork to launch his 2020 campaign. Remember, he ran twice. Did he run in 2020 as openly gay less than 2 weeks after getting divorced? Not that couldn't still be the case. He could have been, those last it may have been his decision to become more open that led to the divorce. That's entirely possible, right? But it just seems like a weird omission to make. And a complicating factor that not everybody needs to know. And while his 2022 campaign bio mentions his husband, who, according to Santos, lives with him and their 4 dogs on Long Island, all rented, he's kept this previous marriage out of the public eye entirely. It's entirely possible that Santos, who claims he has, quote, never experienced discrimination in a Republican Party, has been living comfortably as an openly gay man for, as he says, more than a decade. People get married for countless reasons. That's true too, right? I mean, I'm openly gay, but I'll marry you so you can get a green card, although that would be a hell of a story for a Republican to have to tell. But there could be other reasons. Santos' situation, though, is curious because he never disclosed his divorce to voters and never reconciled his prior marriage to a woman, which ended just 12 days before he established his first congressional campaign with his claims of being an out and proud gay Republican. You deserve an explanation for that. Santos, 34, made his first bid for Congress in 2020, losing to Tom Suozzi, who now is retiring, before toppling Democratic opponent Robert Zimmerman this year. But following a New York Times investigation that suggested Santos had fictionalized key elements of his resume, he's already facing calls to resign as well as a possible ethics investigation. The colleges Santos says he attended don't have a record of him. Citigroup and Goldman Sachs don't either, though he claimed to work there. The IRS has no records of his nonprofit. He still faces, quote, unresolved legal trouble in Brazil. Remember that one? The kiting checks or stolen checks. His past business ventures appear flimsy, and even his address was called into question. Where do those dogs live? In response to the Times report, Santos' attorney, Joseph Murray, may or may not be an attorney, may or may not be named Joseph Murray, released a statement, maybe, that while stopping short of denying the accusations, painted his client as a victim because he represents the kind of progress that the left is so threatened by. I mean, he's got a leftist resume, but okay. A gay, maybe. Latino, maybe. Immigrant, probably, actually not. And Republican, yeah, okay, who won a Biden district in overwhelming fashion by showing everyday voters that there's a better option than the broken promises and failed policies of the Democratic Party. The Times story set off a rapid-fire round of criticism that extended not just to the congressman-elect, but to Democratic opposition researchers, Republican vetters, and media who had not called attention to the now glaring holes in this story before the election. While those details went largely unnoticed during the campaign, the Times investigation prompted reporters and internet sleuths around the country to dig deeper into Santos' past or what they could find of it. It's unclear why Santos has not disclosed his marriage and divorce, but it doesn't fit well with his current biography. He has previously told U.S. and Brazilian media that he was engaged to a man, a fellow Brazilian, whom Santos identified as a pharmacist. And his campaign bio claims he lives on Long Island with his husband. The Daily Beast could find no public record of the man's work in that field, nor could we find a marriage record. But New York court records show that in 2019, someone named George DeVolder Santos, with a second initial of A, finalized an uncontested divorce with Euadla Santos Vieira Santos. That's a lot of Santoses for a Jewish person. Public records searches reveal only one person in the United States with that name. I mean, all right. Well, there are 20 people named Euadla Santos Vieira, but there's only one named Euadla Santos Vieira Santos. But there are two curiously named Euadla Santos Vieira Santos Boutros Ghali. That's the amazing part. Public records researches shows only one person in the United States with that name, Euadla. It's Uadla. Euadla Santos and George Santos did not reply to calls or questions sent via text to numbers associated with them. Again, delicate language there. A deed for a $750,000 house purchase in Union County, New Jersey this June lists Euadla Santos as the buyer and says she is married. She could be married to somebody else. She's the only purchaser listed on the property documents. George Santos, whose middle name is Anthony, sometimes uses DeVolder, his late mother's maiden name. He incorporated it into his campaign, DeVolder Santos for Congress, as well as his own supposed financial services company, the DeVolder Organization. Santos has shifted between different combinations of those four names over the years, sometimes embracing his father's Santos surname, other times going by his mother's DeVolder. Santos mother died in 2016, according to... Oh, I'm way late on playing our outro music. Sorry about that, Justice. We'll get out of here and out of your way in just a second. Mom died in 2016, right? According to online crowdfunding campaign that Santos launched to raise money to cover the costs of the wake. This despite his being a Wall Street tycoon. But not yet. In 2019, he wasn't. And also, he never really was. The GoFundMe page lists Anthony D. Santos as the beneficiary and Anthony DeVolver, it says here, but probably DeVolder, of Sunnyside, New York as the organizer. And the fundraising campaign remains open, so you can still donate 6 years after her death. Santos's campaign bio page claims his mother was the first female executive at a major financial institution. Though the specific institution is unnamed. The bio also says George's mother was in her office in the South Tower on the morning of September 11, 2001. She survived the horrific events of that day, but unfortunately passed away a few years later, about 15 years later. And on Wednesday, Jewish outlet The Forward added still more intrigue, suggesting Santos may have been untruthful when he claimed during the campaign, including on his website, to have Jewish ancestry. The report led incoming House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries to declare his future colleague a complete and utter fraud. But the divorce revelation and apparent secrecy around it complicates a central piece of the image Santos has burnished as a dynamic and culturally revolutionary figure. That does seem rather odd, doesn't it?
From NetworksRadio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, you're never going to believe it, but there's actually more, and we're not going to get to it, but David Korn has information that he has apparently also got lots of financial lies on his resume as well. We'll see if we can't sum some of those up and see if we can get you something pre-recorded for tomorrow. In the meantime, Justice Putnam will carry you on next, right here on Netroots Radio.